Hi there, I'm Claire McDonnell Liu and this is Family Health Lab. In today's conversation, I'm talking with Dr Chris Knobbe. Chris is a world expert in fats, especially seed oils. Find out if the oils in your kitchen really are a poison, and the big question, are we going to keep feeding these to our kids?
You're listening to the Family Health Lab. Healthy parents, healthy kids.
Hello, hi Chris. Thank you for jumping on to talk seed oils and healthy fats and unhealthy fats.
Hi Claire, yes, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. I appreciate it.
We're talking seed oils and this is you're a world expert on this topic, and I find of all of the topics within the nutrition world and perhaps low carb and keto circuit, I still think people are quite confused about what seed oils are, what's a healthy fat, what they should have in their kitchen, or what might be better for them. So can we start by diving into what is a seed oil? So that would be a great place to begin.
Yeah, Claire. So the seed oils really are, so since you went, right for the jugular, what are they? And I'm going to list what I think are the bad ones. Okay. And so they're really soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, sesame, and peanut oils. Those are the oils that are very, very problematic, very dangerous because they are high in omega-6 fats. And those omega-6 fats, when you consume them to excess, they accumulate in our body fat and which means they accumulate in our cells. And just to get right to the devil of this is that they are, in that scenario, they're pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic, and nutrient deficient. And those are what I call the 4 pillars of hazard in this scenario. And that sets us up for overweight, obesity, and virtually all of the chronic disease, Claire. And by chronic disease, I mean, the diseases like coronary heart disease, stroke, cancers, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, age-related macular degeneration, all of the autoimmune diseases, and the list goes on, even rare diseases. So all of these things, my research over the past 12 years has shown me that it is primarily the seed oils, the vegetable oils, that are driving all of this disease. So now we're actually done with the whole podcast.
That's an absolutely huge answer. And there's so much to unpick there. So for, say, a mum in her kitchen at home, or she's about to go shopping, so they're the oils that would be in the supermarket. They'd be in most homes, wouldn't they? And would we call them seed oils, or would most people know them as vegetable oils?
Yeah, most people would call them vegetable oils. And the reason that we, might want to start to differentiate that is because the vegetable oils include the seed oils, all of those I just named, but they would also include the fruit oils like olive oil and avocado oil. And then you have the tropical oils, which would be coconut oil, palm oil, and palm kernel oil. And so those 3 categories, really, that makes up all the vegetable oils. And so it's the seed oils that are particularly dangerous. And the fruit oils, olive oil and avocado oil, are much lower in omega-6. And we can get in details if you want to, but they're much lower in omega-6. So that's why they're so much safer. And then the tropical oils, palm oil, palm kernel oil, and coconut oil, they're very low, relatively very low in omega-6. Now, let me just clarify that. So the palm oil is actually roughly about the same as olive oil. It's about 10% omega-6 linoleic acid. But the coconut oil and palm kernel oil are both about 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. Now, let me just contrast that just for a second, Claire. So the primary omega-6 rich seed oils in the United States are soybean oil and canola oil. Those two are the bulk of the oils in the United States, and they are, so the omega-6 linoleic acid, which is the primary omega-6 fat in all fats, is about 54 to 56%. That's soybean oil, and canola oil is around 20% omega-6 fat. So the seed oils run the gamut from around 20% omega-6 fat up to about 78% omega-6 fat in safflower oil. So that's how high they are. And just for a moment, let me contrast that with the healthy animal fats, which is what I would recommend everybody cook with and use. It would be butter, which is about 1.5 to 2.5% omega-6 linoleic acid. And then lard and beef tallow would both be around 1.5 to 2.5% also. And so is chicken fat if the animals are raised ancestrally, meaning that they're consuming their native traditional diet. We can break that down further if you want to. But basically, so to get to, what should we be, what should we have in our kitchens to, for a cooking fat, and what is healthy? And I would say the easiest thing to do is to, first of all, just get rid of all of your oils, unless you need a whole bunch of oil, and cook everything in butter. And if you need lots of oil, I would say the easiest thing to do is cook in coconut oil. That's the simplest thing to do right there. And you could just, for the most part, like we don't need any oils in our kitchen at all. I don't have any oils to cook with. Everything gets cooked in butter at our house, basically.
A quick kind of look around, other people's kitchens, my friends, families, and definitely people that I've worked with nutritionally on coaching. If I ask them what a normal, probably what they'd consider a healthy option, they probably point to one of these vegetables. I mean, and some are they would consider more healthy than others. And the spray oils are really quite popular as well. You have those in America, I believe they're quite popular. Just for its convenience, isn't it? You mentioned soybean being the most common in America, and then canola. Canola is huge in Australia. I think it's around 80%. So it's by far the highest used over here. And then I think quite interestingly in the UK, where I'm from, I'm quite interested in what happens there on the food market and in nutritionally, that they've moved back to olive oil, and it's one of the main oils in use there. And then it's followed by sunflower oil and then vegetable oils, but it's significantly high. I just wondered if you had a comment on what drove the English market back into olive oil.
And I'll tell you this, on a global scale, the consumption of olive oil is right around 1% on a global scale. And I know it's not more than 1.5%. It's almost negligible in terms of being, in terms of global consumption compared to all the other oils. Mm-hmm. So it barely even, is on the radar in terms of affecting our overall omega-6 consumption.
That surprises me, but I find it really interesting. Sometimes I think you surround yourself by people who are changing their fats, and you can forget how it looks in other people's kitchens, and then in the supermarkets, what the predominant oils are there. My son was cooking a recipe recently. He's quite a budding chef. And we went to the supermarket to get the ingredients for his recipe, and we were having a stand-up row in the supermarket because he wanted to buy seed oil because it was on the recipe, and he's a stickler for following the exact rules. And I had a tough time convincing him to swap it out. So it just showed me that, and I mean, there's 2 points there that I want to discuss with you. One, that we're still being steered towards the seed oils, but that's a big topic. But I just wanted talk about how it's affecting every family, I read on a seed oil manufacturer's website that it touches every Australian family. In fact, it said, hopefully, we hope it touches every Australian family. We believe it does. And
just seed oils in general?
Seed oils. So,
or vegetable oils?
Vegetables. It was a vegetable oil manufacturer. And they were saying it's in every kitchen. You know, most families cook with it. And if not, it's in their soaps, or it's in their cupboard in their pantry, in their fridge. It's in the microwave meals. So, I mean, that was a point I'd like to discuss with you. What else is it? If we're not cooking with it and we stop cooking with it, what foods is it in that we might be surprised about?
Yeah, that's a good question, because, you know, I see people that they're overweight and have metabolic syndrome and or even diabetic, and they will tell you, which tells me immediately that their omega-6 consumption has been very high for many years. And you can only get there through seed oil consumption. And one of the most common immediate retorts from some of these people is, oh, I don't use any vegetable oils. It's because they're not putting them in their food at home, but you don't need to. In the United States, let me just mention this historical reference, Claire, that we had no vegetable oils at all until until the end of the American Civil War, which ended in 1865. So we got cottonseed oil. That was the first available vegetable oil, 1866 in the United States. And consumption was trivial until 1909, when we then added in soybean oil, and then all the others came after that, essentially. You know, corn, canola, cottonseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, sesame, peanut oil, all those, and a little bit of olive oil, right? They all came later, essentially. And as of 2010, the average American is consuming 80 grams of vegetable oil per day. That's 720 calories worth. It's 32% of U.S. caloric intake. And guess what? Almost none of those people are pouring any vegetable oil into any of their food. You don't need to. You get it from the foods you buy that are already packaged and prepared, because they're all made with vegetable oils. You can't hardly find any of these that are made with butter, lard, or beef tallow, right? Look at the ingredients on any processed food. You will almost never see butter, lard, or beef tallow on the ingredients. So you get it in your processed food, you get it in all restaurant foods, because they're all cooking with vegetable oil, and you get it in all fast foods. This is what makes fast food so dangerous. And I might just say, Claire, I got to get this out there real quick to your audience, that, you know, when I first started doing this research back in 2011, so it's been really about 12 years, you know, I was, you know, basically went on an archaeological dig to start looking at all of this evidence regarding overweight, obesity, and the development of heart disease and cancers and type 2 diabetes and all that. And basically, in a nutshell, all of these disorders were extremely rare, and many of them completely absent in the 19th century, when we had almost no seed oils. Right. And as they increased, you know, then all of these disorders just became rampant. So now we have, you know, globally, even we have, it's an explosion of overweight and obesity and chronic disease. Right. And it all is in parallel with really two things: processed foods and vegetable oils. And there are basically, what I've uncovered in the last couple of years as well, is that there are many nations, I'll name 5, where we see basically either some combination of calories going down, carbohydrates going down, and sugar going down, while overweight, obesity, diabetes, cancer, and macular degeneration all go through the roof, right? So So those people who want to blame this on sugar or carbohydrates, the data does not support that anywhere. It doesn't even support it worldwide. What we're seeing is we've seen globally since 1960s, the sugar consumption has increased about 5%, and the carbohydrate consumption is going down. But obesity in men has doubled during that time in the last 5 decades. Obesity in men, I think, tripled. Obesity in women more than doubled. And it's, similar for diabetes. All of these have gone way, way up. Again, and what we see in country after country and even globally is this continued, process of supplanting and replacing our natural animal fats, which is primarily butter, but butter, lard, and beef tallow, essentially our natural animal fats, with vegetable oils. And so we just have this explosion. Everywhere you look, you see this increasing omega-6 consumption, and it's reflected in our body fat, and that's all proven. So we accumulate, as I mentioned early on, we begin to accumulate these oils in our fat, and that is proven by the presence of omega-6 linoleic acid in the body fat, for example. And that parallels all of this disease. So the United States has the highest consumption of seed oils per capita in the world, and we are the most obese nation in the world of the developed countries. It's not an accident. Vietnam, for example, was recently the leanest nation in the world. They also had the lowest seed oil consumption in the world, or they were in the bottom 2 or 3, I think it was. That's out of like 170 countries where they had data. So it's not an accident. It's not an accident.
They also have the least processed food. But I'm really interested in that paradox that you've mentioned. The 5 countries, was Brazil one of those countries, out of interest? Because
I don't have data on Brazil.
Okay.
But yeah, so I don't know if I mentioned those countries. So it was the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, and Israel. All of those countries have some version of that. Like, for example, in the United States, sugar has been going down since either somewhere between 1999 and 2004. We see sugar on a downward trend. Since 1997, carbohydrates are going down in the United States. Since 2002, calories are going down in the United States. And yet, we see this trajectory like this. We've had the worst increase in obesity in the last 20 years, and the worst increases in diabetes by far. But what's the one thing going up? It's the vegetable oils. Mm-hmm. Still going up, still replacing our animal fat. And it's a similar in the United Kingdom. Sugar has been going down since 1961, while obesity either tripled or quadrupled. In Australia, sugar has been going down. Sugar and carbohydrates have been going down since 1961, while obesity and diabetes, same thing, through the roof. What's strange, I think, is how little we talk about the facts and look into it, and the research. There isn't enough noise, particularly in the media, really, about this correlation. And we can talk about the evidence a little bit more, but if people are saying that we don't have enough evidence, then why are we not making it a priority? But I just wanted to quickly go back to the foods for families. What does this mean in real terms in my own kitchen? It is, I think, in surprising foods. So you've mentioned you don't have to cook with it. But I believe many people are still cooking with it, but you don't have to. That's not necessarily where you might be getting this. It's actually in your supermarket bread, in your pies, if you're having kind of a convenience meal or a fast food or a takeaway or a microwave meal, it's very likely to be in pastries and in,
junk foods, basically, I think we'd probably suspect it was in those. But salad dressings, sauces, lots and lots of children's food items, cereal bars, granola bars, things that we might suspect as healthy, you know, the new vegan kind of foods that are often health washed with health kind of claims. A lot of that will be formulated with these types of oils that your research is telling you that it's harmful, but it's in a much of family foods, which, you know, is a huge problem, ice cream as well, and things like that. And eating out, you've already briefly, you mentioned eating out. Mm-hmm. Can we eat out and avoid this type of food? Because, you know, as you just said, cafes, cafeteria, workplace kind of canteens, if you're eating in a Chinese restaurant or a fast food restaurant, or you're eating at a nice restaurant, the dressing is likely to be seed oil, isn't it? It's likely cooked in these oils. So can we still eat out?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You can eat out. And I eat out, but not very often. But when I do, I'm just very cautious about what I order and how I order it. And you can also even, you know, ask for your food to not contain any vegetable oils. It actually may work. It may not, depending on what you're trying to order. But, you know, for example, if you order steak or you order sushi, for example, essentially, those things tend to be seed oil free, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And you can look at different foods. Like today, I ate out with a friend in a seafood restaurant, and they cooked our fish in butter, right? And we did not have any seed oils in that meal. There was not any in that meal. So they made rice that had butter in it, and they made the fish with butter. And so I'm really cautious about it. And but the main thing is you know, if we can get into, you know, a lot more detail, but the main thing is just to actively try to avoid those. And it does take diligence. It takes a lot of vigilance to be able to be essentially vegetable oil free, because for the most part, you need to prepare your own food. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to have control of your food. Otherwise, you're going to be getting vegetable oils. Yeah. All of those packaged foods, if you just go through them, you can look at hundreds of thousands of foods actually, and they are almost all going to contain, if they have an added fat, it's going to be vegetable oils, because the food manufacturers are out to make a profit. And I'll tell you, in 2014, the average cost of an American's total vegetable oil consumption for the day, 80 grams, which is 720 calories worth of food, would cost a big food manufacturer 5.6 cents to buy that seed oil. Mm. That's how much it would cost them, 5.6 cents. Mm-hmm. If they were to replace that with butter, it would have cost them 36 cents. So more than 6 times as expensive. Well, they're not going to do that, right? Because so if you think about like a Pop-Tart, you know, what's it made out of? Refined flour, sugar, and vegetable oils, right? That's how they make it. And, you know, for literally 10 cents in the United States worth of food, I kind of use the term loosely here, you know, they can make a package of Pop-Tarts that sells for, I don't know, $3 or something, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, and then most of their money is spent on marketing that, you know, that food, right? But they literally, for 10 cents, you know, worth of, you know, initial product, they've got it on this, you know, the shelves for maybe $3 or so. So
it's money.
That's how it works.
Money's at the nub of this, really. Although it's marketed as healthy, but the nub of the issue is money and profit. I definitely hear you on that. And talking about it, looking and being marketed as healthy, it actually looks quite appealing. The label's often got some beautiful kind of meadow with yellow golden oil in it. It looks clean. It looks quite pure. It looks healthy. I think we've been over decades told that this is better for us, that this is good. Have you got any comment on how it's made? Because that's fascinating, how they've got this gorgeous, golden liquid to kind of come to us and produce it on mass scale.
First of all, where they make these oils, a lot of them, they look indistinguishable from a petroleum refinery. This is huge industrial manufacturing. The seeds are first, they're crushed, heated, pressed, and then chemically alkalinized, chemically bleached, and chemically deodorized before they end up going in the bottle. Now, I made that sound so, quick and simple. Mm-hmm. That is an extraordinarily complicated and expensive process to set up these. If you look at these, refineries, again, they look like a petroleum oil refinery. It's a very complex process for most of these oils, but they can afford to do this because if you think about it, like in the United States, they're making around almost somewhere between a fourth and a third of our food supply, right? And so there's this is a multi-billion-dollar business in the United States alone. So anyway, by the time you end up with this product that's clean and, looks clean, and it has this, clear color, and it's deodorized so it doesn't stink, because otherwise it would stink because it's oxidized, right? It would, stink like the equivalent of rotting fish, but this is rotting oil that they deodorize that. That's the last and final step. And by the way, these oils get heated 4 or 5 times when they're the oils that go through this process I just discussed and are also deodorized. And they can be heated up to, I think it's 200 to 250 degrees Celsius, but it's 400 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure I had the conversion right there, but anyway, that's how hot it is in Fahrenheit. And in that, I mentioned that because that process of heating also oxidizes these oils, and that also produces trans fats. So when people think they're also trans fat free, these oils are not trans fat free. These oils are proven to contain trans fats. Oh. And up to 4.6%. So anywhere from 0 to 4.6%, averaging 1.1% of the fat is trans fat in these oils. But they get away with it, like in the United States, because they make when they sell the product, they make the serving size small enough that the trans fat level is under 0.5 gram. And that is the criteria that they need in order to put on the label 0 grams trans fat in the United States. The FDA allows them to put 0 grams trans fat on the label when it actually contains up to 0.5 grams of trans fat.
I did not know that. That is worrying. That's awful.
Very worrying. But that's even if you could remove the trans fats from vegetable oils, wouldn't change my opinion about them at all. They are disgustingly dangerous. I avoid them like the plague, and I think everyone should. Absolutely, positively, in my opinion, the most dangerous thing in our food supply by far. And I think if when you look at this, this so-called Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule of, what am I going to do to get the most bang for my buck in terms of correcting my diet? The first thing is get rid of the vegetable oils. I think you're 80% of the way towards a healthy diet in one fell swoop, and it might be 90% just by doing that one thing. Okay. And I've had colleagues say to me, people can't just get rid of their vegetable oils. Yes, they can. They do it all the time. And I know, I literally know, 100 people that have come to me and said, one fell swoop. One day they were consuming them, the next day they were not. All you have to do is watch out for the oils. And like I said, keep keep in mind what that list of the ugly oils are, because that'll serve you well. All of this, by the way, I have a new book coming out, The Ancestral Diet Revolution, and all of this and a fantastic amount more is detailed. And this is deep, this is good science, but it's readily understandable by anyone. So the take-home points are very, very simple.
So you take people, with your book, you take people through all of these concepts, the research, what actually initially interested you. I do know about your book actually because Dr. James Mukie has, we've discussed it as part of a group in Australia that are putting together a submission for the review of the Australian dietary guidelines. So we were very, very interested in your research. Has been very, very helpful and supportive for our group putting a submission asking for this particular issue of seed oils to be reviewed for the public health. So I'm aware of your book and I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be a great resource for families to get hold of. I've watched videos of canola oil. I think it was canola oil being made of one particular oil. And you're right. I think if you're trying to convince a family member or your teens to be interested in this issue, they might not be that interested, but you show them that short video of how those oils are made, and there's no going back from seeing that. And right. the solvent wash alone, putting it through a over 70-minute chemical wash with petrochemicals to strip down, break down the seed and extract that oil. The smell of that oil refinery must be insane. But to watch that process and then let yourself or your children eat it, I don't think there's any going back from that. On that process, I was really interested to learn about the cake. What happens to the sludge that they dry out and call it a cake? I hadn't realised, Chris, that's the grain-fed food that goes to our cows and our poultry and our pig feedstock. So as well as avoiding the oils as best we can by eating whole food, as you've said, and cooking more from home and being cautious about labels. How concerned are you about meat that from the cattle that are eating this type of food?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because the next step, so there's a lot of steps really to try to optimize your health. And but like I said, the first step is get rid of the vegetable oils. And the second step, in order to keep your omega-6 low, would be to avoid the meats that are high in omega-6. Now, this should never have happened, but just as you just mentioned, these animals are being fed this cake that comes out of these factories that are high in the omega-6 fat as well. And that makes two commonly consumed animals, chickens and pigs, that makes their body fat, omega-6, go high as well. And so the reason that is because chickens and pigs are monogastric animals, single stomach animals. They're like humans in that regard. And we don't have a way to hydrogenate these polyunsaturated fats, that's the omega-6 fats, into monounsaturated fats or saturated fats. But cattle do. So ungulates, or the ruminant animals that have they're polygastric, meaning they've got multi-stomachs. One of those stomachs is a biohydrogenation chamber, and it ferments the food, and in that process, they hydrogenate the omega-6 fats into monounsaturated and saturated fats. So no matter what you feed cattle, they will have low omega-6 in their body fat. Now, so let me give you some numbers. So 100% grass-fed cattle, they will have omega-6 in their body fat of around 2% roughly. Okay. Whereas if you grain feed cattle, like you feed them corn and soy, which are high in omega-6, and this cake you're talking about, for example, that's what they're eating. Their body fat will only go to about 3 to 3.5% omega-6. All right. Again, contrast that to canola oil that's 20% and soybean oil that's 56%. So you're really good, even in terms of omega-6, no matter what beef you eat or bison or whatever ruminant, you're going to have very low omega-6, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Not true with chicken and pork. So when chicken and pigs are fed these like corn and soy, their body fat will go up to about 20% omega-6 linoleic acid, very similar to humans. Same situation. And you don't want to be consuming that fat because that's like consuming a vegetable oil, mm-hmm. right? You know what I'm saying in terms of the omega-6? So if you're going to consume chicken and pork, then I would look for chicken and pork that are ancestrally fed, which means they're not fed corn and soy. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, now you've taken step number 2 in terms of getting your omega-6 down. And I'll just mention while we're here, step 3 to get your omega-6 down is get rid of nuts and seeds. Oh. Or just reduce them drastically, because nuts and seeds are all very high in omega-6. Mm-hmm. There's only one nut that's not, and it's macadamia nuts. Mm-hmm. So macadamia nuts are like 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. So now people might start thinking, well, this is just too much to do. I don't want to think about all this, but they're very easy steps really. And if you just think, well, I'll get rid of vegetable oils. And if you only eat beef and, maybe wild caught fish or whatever, that's also really low in omega-6, you've made a tremendous strides mm-hmm. in two steps that are easy to implement. And you do this for yourself and your kids or whatever, whoever you're cooking for, you've just changed their entire lives. And the life you save may be your own and it may be your children, because this is what prevents coronary heart disease, the number 1 killer in the world, and prevents cancer, which is the number 2 killer in the world. And this is all it takes. You just do these 2 things, really, and you're that much closer to total safety in terms of your diet. And I think if you do this for 3 years, you will get your omega-6 down in your body. You will start getting it down to ancestral levels, and you will become safe in terms of preventing heart disease or heart disease progression, and you will also prevent cancer. And you can reverse diabetes with the exact same thing. This is how you reverse diabetes, is what I'm talking about here. You do this and you get rid of the processed foods, and then you're there.
A comment for you, because we're talking about omega-6 and it all the way through, your research, your information, but also this conversation, we mention or skip around omega-6. Just a comment that it's not inherently bad. It's actually an essential fatty acid. So the problem is, it's got some really interesting functions in the body. It's very powerful as a signaler. It's got some really useful uses within the body. But so you're not saying that omega-6 is bad. We are in a unprecedented situation. The context of our food has changed. And that's really the problem, isn't it?
Yes. Omega-6 linoleic acid is an essential fatty acid, just like omega-3 alpha linolenic acid. And these are the 2 essential fats. We must have them in our diet to live. But if you consume any food whatsoever, you will get enough of those 2 fats. And it doesn't matter what you're eating, because every food on the planet that is not made in a laboratory where the fat is extracted somehow, and it's a very difficult process to do it. You'd have to chemically extract the fat using, alcohol or ethers, generally speaking, in order to get 100% of the fat out. So if your diet was 100% white rice, or if it was apples or bananas or potatoes or things that, we don't think of as even having fat, right? These things that are super low fat, all of those will provide all of the omega-6 linoleic acid you need. You only need 0.5% of your diet as omega-6 linoleic acid. So, 0.5% of your diet is, so 2,000 calories, if you're on just using some round numbers, 2,000 calories, let's say if that's your diet, then you need 20 calories would be 1%. You need 10 calories worth, right? So you need about 1 gram of omega-6 linoleic acid. You know how much fat that is? That, if that was, in a teaspoon, that's, about 1/4 to 1/5 of a teaspoon, right? And that's all you need. So again, just a cup of rice and you've satisfied your omega-6 linoleic acid requirement.
Could you repeat that for me? How much does the body need a teaspoon per day?
Yeah. So of the of omega-6 linoleic acid,
linoleic.
Yeah. So you need 0.5% of your calories. Mm-hmm. So you literally only need about one gram a day. Mm-hmm. So 1 gram a day would suffice for all of your requirements. And we looked at this. Now, we modeled American diets in 1865 before we had any vegetable oils whatsoever. If you think back 150 years ago, nobody had ever heard of vegetable oil. This was a term concocted, in the early 20th century to try to sell these oils. They don't come from vegetables, as we've already talked about. They come from seeds and fruits and, they're tropical oils, right? Those are the different vegetable oils. But anyway, so in 1865, before we had any oils whatsoever, and all of the food was natural, right? We didn't have corn and soy fed animals, fed in concentrated animal feeding operations. We looked at that diet, and Americans would have consumed about 2.2 to 2.6 grams of omega-6 linoleic acid per day. You know what that works out to be? 1.1% of our diet in 1865. By 2008, Americans were consuming 29 grams of omega-6 linoleic acid per day, 11.8% of the diet. And we are the most obese nation on the planet in the end of developed nations. And we are, I think, probably the sickest nation on the planet. This is exactly why. Mm-hmm. It all goes together. This omega-6, again, you accumulate those in your body fat, sets you up for this pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic environment. And it's, again, just a recipe for disaster. But that's where we went. And we got there over a century and a half almost, right? And this is why. So all these chronic diseases, all this obesity, and overweight and all that, didn't happen overnight. If we would have went from 0 seed oils in 1865 to 80 grams a day in 1866, everything would have just hit suddenly and they would have known right then and there. But that's not what happened. It took, we were consuming, 9 grams of oils per day in 1909, 19.5 grams of seed oils per person per day in 1961, 80 grams per day in 2010. That's how we got there, right? It's a gradual process.
And then a steep rise, we're talking a hockey stick curve, really, that's astronomical increase. And you said, pretty much a third of American calories are consumed as seed oils, not necessarily in their cooking, home cooking, but either restaurant, fast food, eating out, or the packaged foods. That's a crazy amount. And that's where it gets looping back to omega-6 not being inherently a bad fat. Like you said, it's essential. It's got amazing properties. We need it to live. But this is from factory made oils, factory foods, not natural, We could not produce those in our home kitchen. They are ultra processed foods. It made with these crazy processes that you've said, and they have just been hugely injected into the human food circuit, and now form such an incredible part of Americans' diets. But what goes on, as we know, in America with the food system, the dietary guidelines and disease levels is being replicated. We're not far behind in Australia and England and all around the world. But that leads me to ask about why the alarm bells aren't ringing. I mean, or actually, I think it's really worth pointing out that these factory-made oils, with these crazy processes, they're being promoted as healthy. So the American Heart Association, Harvard, if we go to any of these health bodies, organizations, esteemed universities, what are we going to be told about seed oils? Yeah,
we're going to be told that we should consume them. And, I've been looking at this for a decade, and I've read I can't tell you how many thousands and thousands of scientific papers. It's been my full-time life for the last 8 years. And I left practice to pursue this. And so I've been investigating this, like I said, full time for 8 years. And here's the answer is there is one single reason that these organizations like Harvard School of Public Health, Tufts University's Nutrition Department, Mayo Clinic's Nutrition Department, Cleveland Clinic's Nutrition Department, American Heart Association, that they tell us that these oils are healthy. Why? Because they lower cholesterol. And in some of my presentations, I say, and they do lower cholesterol. And you know what also lowers cholesterol in the same way? Arsenic. And it's true. And again, and everybody laughs. And, and I say, but I'm not just making this up. This is exactly, arsenic has so many parallels in terms of the end result, to vegetable oils. Okay. Why? Because the primary problem with vegetable oils is pro-oxidative, and that oxidation, which is really, really important, which basically like we're rusting inside, is because of these polyunsaturated fats. They oxidize easily. And that sets us up for this, again, oxidation. And, this is, so that's what maims and kills us, is primarily oxidation. It's not inflammation. Inflammation cannot hold a candle to oxidation in terms of the threat, the danger. So it's a chronic toxin. It's a chronic poison. And I tell people these are chronic metabolic biological poisons. They poison the mitochondria, and this, poisons your ability to create energy. And it's, so it's just disastrous to our metabolism and disastrous to our health.
So I think that, there's so much to emphasize, but you're calling this a poison. And if I go to any of my friends' houses, or if I go, to the school and to the school canteen, I'm going to find bottles of it, in the kitchen canteen, in any restaurant, and in all of the community, the families' homes. But you would class this as a poison?
Yes, this is, I would classify all of the seed oils as chronic metabolic biological poisons is how I would classify them. Absolutely. No question about it. You think about it, every organization in the world that are major organizations that are supposed to help protect our health, like the World Health Organization, the Pan American Health Organization. Every single one of these organizations and all of the major nutrition organizations like Harvard and Tufts and Mayo, they will all agree that processed foods are the problem. They all agree. But you know what's interesting, Claire, is that, in general, you've got so many papers that cover this, and in general it's pretty hard for them to argue that processed foods are not the problem. And yet, you know what's interesting about this? The primary ingredient, even on a caloric basis in processed foods, is seed oils.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
processed foods are four things: they're seed oils, refined flours, refined sugars, and trans fat. Mm-hmm. That's basic. And you know, a lot of countries, they're trying to get the trans fat out. But as I mentioned, you can't get the trans fat out when you've got seed oils in them, mm-hmm. right? And so that's part of this issue too. But again, it's just it just is mind-boggling to me that, you know, people can look at this and say, you know, processed foods are terrible, but vegetable oils are good, right? It makes no sense whatsoever.
A lot of this doesn't make much sense to me. I just think that, I mean, I keep going back to the process of how this is made and how this was not part of the human food chain. This is not an evolutionary food. We cannot process this. Now I've moved to Australia, and, you know, you have an indigenous population in America, but the indigenous population are particularly suffering with this problem that they cannot process.
Oh, yeah.
And their rates of diabetes, of heart conditions, of obesity, of all of the chronic health conditions is so much worse. And yet the Australian dietary guidelines, very much on a par with the American ones, are telling them this is what they should be eating. The American, the dietary guidelines for America, as well as recommending 6 serves of grain, 3 of those being refined grains, and 10% of calories, up to 10% of calories of sugar. They also recommend 5.5 teaspoons of seed oils per day, or vegetable oils per day. Which
teaspoons?
Teaspoons, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Which in terms of what you were saying earlier of how much we should be getting of omega-6 and how we can process that in the body, that's a really interesting recommendation. For, you know, the whole of the dietary guidelines very, very interesting, and there's quite a few proponents of it being revised and changed and it not being fit for human health. Yes, I mean, what are your comments on them recommending 5.5 teaspoons per day?
Yeah, I was doing the math in my head, because roughly a teaspoon is going to give you about 5 grams of oil, I think. I think that's right. So that would give you, that's about 5 teaspoons, I think is roughly 25 grams. And if that was soybean oil, more than half of that's going to be omega-6 linoleic acid. So that's going to give you, ballpark 12 to 14 grams of omega-6 linoleic acid right there. Mm-hmm. Now, I remember I mentioned earlier that Americans were only getting 2.2 to 2.6 grams of omega-6 linoleic acid in 1865 when we had no oils. That's what we should be shooting for, is that number right there. But if you get up to 5 grams a day, for almost anyone, you're going to be under 2%. And, one other thing I might mention here is that all of these, ancestrally living populations that, the populations like the Maasai warriors of Kenya and Tanzania, and the Catawbans and the Tokelauans, and the Papua New Guineans of Tucacenta, and the Ashe of Paraguay, and I could go on and on. These populations that do not have any processed foods and don't have any vegetable oils, I've looked at all of their diets and scientifically analyzed these, and they're all under about 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. They range from about 0.6 to 1.7% omega-6 linoleic acid. But westernized populations, I think I mentioned before, now are ranging from 7 to 12% omega-6 linoleic acid, mm-hmm. right? And so, that recommendation in Australia for 5.5 teaspoons.
Oh, that was America, that one.
Oh, okay, there we go. Perfect. Yeah, we would do that, of course, right? Again, it's very healthy because they would have recommended more, right? But their goal is not too much of any one thing,
In moderation.
And you don't want too much fat, right? And so they're going to keep it relatively low, but this is enough to lower your LDL cholesterol. But it will also, by the way, Claire, it will also, that omega-6 oil will cause your LDL to oxidize. Just as we talked about oxidation before, that's what causes LDL to oxidize. Oxidized LDL is what drives atherosclerosis. And this is well known. There's been thousands of papers on this in the last 30 years. I think 9,000 papers on this. And so the very simple, rule is that it is the omega-6 fats that are incorporated into the LDL, and therefore they oxidize. And when they oxidize, then they are taken up out of the circulation into the vascular wall, through the endothelium and into the tunica, and starts the atherosclerotic plaque, right? This is what causes atherosclerosis. So the very thing that they're recommending, so-called lowers your LDL cholesterol, and indeed it does, at the expense of causing you to develop atherosclerosis, the very thing that we're trying to prevent in the first place. So again, this is insanity.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, because that's the reason given that these are being recommended by those institutions that you've already mentioned, and the dietary guidelines. Mm-hmm. And those dietary guidelines will inform what your doctor tells you, what your school meals your children are served in their schools, and all throughout your whole population, all communities. And that was the reason to lower cholesterol, but also to swap out saturated fats. And you said that there's evidence to show that that does reduce cholesterol, but then there's a growing amount of new evidence, updated evidence, that are questioning whether swapping out saturated fats from whole fat sources that the body was traditionally able to handle and deal with, and also whether lowering cholesterol as a standalone health marker is the be-all for heart health. And your research, and gosh, have you dug in for over 12 plus years, your research definitely indicates that's not beneficial to health. Instead, swapping out these industrial factory-made oils would be much more beneficial. There's a lot more to say. Absolutely. There's a lot more to say on the studies, because there are studies that show benefit. I'm not massively all over this, but was it the Sydney Heart Health study, and what was the other study? Is it the Minnesota study have you got a comment on what they found? Well,
so I'll just say that in my view, to summarize those studies, without getting into the detail, because I'd like to comment on this in a different way if I could, cool. Claire. But in general, I don't think that any of those studies, they obviously have not entirely answered the question about coronary heart disease. Otherwise, we would have an answer, right? And there wouldn't be any arguing about whether or not it's saturated fat or polyunsaturated fat causing coronary heart disease. So they didn't really truly answer that. The LA American Veterans Trial certainly showed that towards 7 to 8, 9, I think it was 7 to 8 years, which is, again, this is about the longest trial that's ever been done on a dietary trial, which was not very well done either, because it's impossible to control diets in people. But again, at the end of that, there were, they had more people that died of coronary or cardiovascular disorders that were on the traditional diet, the diet with more saturated fat. Mm-hmm. However, the people that got the PUFA had a higher all-cause mortality, and they had higher cancer deaths. And so overall, the people consuming the polyunsaturated fats were dying younger. But the problem with all of those studies, and none of them are good, none of them are really very good, is the fact that you accumulate the omega-6 fats in your body fat, and the half-life of omega-6 linoleic acid in your body is 600 to 680 days, which is roughly 2 years. And so what this means is that you would have to, everybody is coming into this study with a omega-6 in their body that's already established, right? And you're not going to change that for years, literally for years. So what you're doing, it's, these studies didn't control for any of that. So you would have to have a run-in. In other words, so if, let's say you want to try to establish this, first of all, you'd have to bring everybody into the study and you'd have to control their whatever, their body. If you want to, get their body fatty acids established at a certain level, you'd have to control their fat consumption for years, 3 years, in order to bring it down to ancestral levels, let's say, right? To bring back their omega-6 to ancestral levels. Then you could start the study.
Goodness.
No such thing has ever even been considered. And, first, and then the second problem is that, in order to control diets, if you want to completely control a diet, you have to put people into a metabolic ward. You have to control everything they eat. All their food has to be prepared in a metabolic kitchen. You track everything, track what they're consuming. The subjects of the study are prisoners of the ward. They cannot leave. So the longest studies that have ever completely controlled diets are about 6 months in humans, right? So these are very poor studies. And so this is why I'm convinced that we have to look at population-wide epidemiological data, which means that you track what's happening in the population. And like we've done, we can track that over 150 years. We can track it all the way back to the mid 19th century, and we can look at what happens. And, we've got fantastic data in some countries like Japan. We have exquisite data that shows, as their sugar, like, for example, their calories are going down, their carbohydrates are going down, and their sugar was going down, but their omega-6, their seed oil consumption was going up 4.5-fold over 5 decades. And what happened to them? Obesity in men doubled. Their diabetes increased 345-fold over a period of about 60 years. Their breast cancer went up 5-fold, I think it was. Multiple cancers went up multiple-fold. Age-related macular degeneration went up 82-fold during this time.
Oh my gosh.
Why? There was only one thing that fit with all the data, and it's, that the vegetable oils are going up. Everything else that we consider that's, problematic, sugar, carbs, total calories, all going down, right? I mean, at least during part of that, like their sugar consumption was going down after 1989. So I think we just have to track epidemiological data because you can't control diets in people. It's never been done, not for long periods.
That's a really important point, how you break that down. And I hadn't even thought of it in that control group coming in with those fat deposits in, and that they have that omega-6 high depositions because of biopsies, I believe. So we know that's there. So it's a really valid point about how on earth are we going to get the evidence that we're told that we need before we can review recommending these oils for the public. So on a slightly different take, you've mentioned some ways that we can bring this down. If the advice is to consume them, you're convinced that they're a poison and we shouldn't be consuming them. The way that they're produced is horrendous. So and then we do have omega-6 problem with a proportion within most population, and that is linked to inflammation and oxidization and the other aspects. So, but people trying to change their diet, we did it. You said you've done it for your family. We've done it for our family. We got these fats out around 10 years ago. And when we had children, we started looking into nutrition and it became much more important to us. So it can be done. But I believe, I don't know what you think about this, but I believe this is a health inequality issue because, saying to people by better quality, I mean, you've already talked about how cheap this is and money is at the heart of all of this. How cheap these oils are to produce on this mass scale. So to buy the better quality fats and oils, and to change your food up or to buy grass-fed or wild-caught fish, I believe this is a health inequality. Some families are going to be costed out of this health change. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah,
I think that is certainly an issue, but I think if you're careful about it, there's an inexpensive way to go about this. If you're really, tight on funds, is you don't have to go get, completely organic and completely 100% grass-fed beef and all that. If you can't afford any of that, if you just went with CAFO raised beef, for example, and make the CAFO concentrated animal feeding operation. So that's the animals that are fed corn and soy.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. Well, I would say grain fed, but yeah, soy fed. Yes.
Grain fed, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I say CAFO or CAFO raised beef. So again, those are in the concentrated animal feeding operations. So they're all going to be fed corn and soy. And if that's all you can afford, and then you just eat just the normal whole foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, if you tolerate them, and even the CAFO raised type animals, but you've eliminated, you try to eliminate the vegetable oils, added sugars, and refined flours. That right there, I think you're 90 to 95, 90 plus, maybe 95% of the way towards a perfect diet, right? I mean, it's hard in today's world with all of the herbicides and pesticides, and, we've got endocrine disruptors in our environment, plastics, and all of these are all issues. I agree. They're all issues. But, again, just going after the low-hanging fruit, let's get the big things right first. And, in my life, if I look back, if I would have just known this when I was a kid, could have changed a lot of things for me through a lot of my life. And, I firmly believe, I lost my dad and my next older sister already to these foods for these reasons. This is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this, is because, we've had so much, we've done death and illness in my own family. And I've watched patients go blind in my practice from age-related macular degeneration, AMD, completely, centrally blind in both eyes. It's a tragic thing to watch. It literally, it'll make you cry to see these people come in and tell you they can no longer, drive, they can no longer see their grandchildren, things like that. It's devastating to your life. And some of these people are in their 60s or 70s. They're not that old. Anyway, all of these things together just make me passionate about trying to bring these messages about what I've learned to the world. So anyway, you can do this on a very strict budget, and you don't have to have all organic food, or and you don't have to have 100% grass-fed beef and wild-caught fish. You don't have to do that. Would those be goals? That would be great, but it's not a necessity, and you can benefit greatly by just looking at the major obstacles in your path and accomplish those things.
And that's how I work with people, to meet them where they are as a nutritionist, and then go for the biggest hitters. As I said to them, they often ask me, should I have this in my tea? Should I have, what should I have this particular meal? It's like, let's just talk about the huge issues and let's focus on those changes, which is exactly, you're bringing this down to this is a game changer. This is going to change the children's health long term. This is going to avoid disease. So yeah, I really appreciate you boiling that back down to the big actions that people can take, and cooking as much from scratch, avoiding processed packet food. It is harmful. But yeah, thank you for sharing about your own family, because I did wonder actually what your motivation was for all of this, because this is an epic amount of work that you've put in that will be coming through your book, which I'd like to hear what that's called again and a little bit more about it. But I did wonder about that motivation.
Yeah, a lot of this motivation initially for me, Claire, was born out of my own suffering, and for me it was mostly arthritis. And so some dietary changes have just, made, without getting into details, have made massive impact on the arthritis that started for me when I was in my early 30s.
So young, yeah.
So it's been, so it's, it was 29 years ago. But yeah, so I've learned a great deal, I think, in the last, 12 years, since 2011. But again, it all started with me with arthritis. The book, I don't know if I can get this. It's called The Ancestral Diet Revolution. And this book is available. It should be available most places around the world, I think now, with online retailers. It is available at Amazon, and then all the Ingram Spark type distributors, which would be like Barnes and Noble and Books A Million and Kobo and most of the online retailers. The book is available, and
I can put a link in for that book, Chris. And it's interesting that it's called The Ancestral Diet. I believe you got interested in Weston A. Price, and that's where I came to nutrition from. I was an environmental consultant at the time, and my children had different health complaints, and that was the most inspiring, and still to this day is the most inspiring nutrition type of approach. I find it phenomenal. So I'm very, very excited to get my hands on the book and find out more about it.
Yeah, I'm a Weston A. Price acolyte to the last fiber of my core. It was in 2013 that I finally came across Weston A. Price's research, and that changed the course of my entire life, Claire. I would not be here today, I don't think, if it weren't for Weston Price's research and his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. It's been my guiding, foundation and principles all along, and it's never failed me. It always works. So with that as my paradigm, my framework to see the world of nutrition through, I think I've learned a great deal, and very thankful for that.
As well as bringing this, I believe, second book out, your background, your research, your phenomenal amounts of detailed, in-depth research behind all of this. So you've got a website, and are you active on social media?
So we have just one website currently. It's for Cure AMD Foundation. Of course, that regards macular degeneration. That is at cureamd.org.
I'll let you go, but if you've got any final comments for people on getting started to get these out of their cupboards?
Yeah, Claire, I would say just do it, because your life and your children's lives, if you have children at home or your family, they all depend on this. And it's just so, to me, relatively easy to do. It will change your life. It is astonishing how many people come to us and say, I cannot believe the weight I've lost, the benefits I've had in my health. I've, reversed my diabetes. I've stopped the progression of my macular degeneration. All these kinds of things, because they just took steps towards an ancestral diet like we've talked about today. So just do it. It's just that if you don't have your health, you don't have anything, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what you have in life. None of it will mean anything to you.
Absolutely. I definitely echo that. It's been completely life-changing for me, for my family. So yeah, I've learned a lot in this talk. So thank you so much for your time, Chris.
Oh, thank you, Claire. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe. This really helps us to be able to create more content.